Good morning. Today is Monday morning. It is September 26th. And Pastor Eugene, it's getting a little chilly outside. Have you felt a little chilly? It definitely is sweater weather, as they say. It definitely is cuffing season. Do you know cuffing season is actually kind of inappropriate for this podcast now that I think about it? It means that you're going to start dating or something. It's when single people say, oh, it's time to date. And so they get their pumpkin spice lattes and they start dating together. Did you know that about cuffing season? Did you? Yeah. Anyway, yeah, it is autumn. Have you gone apple picking yet? What is your favorite apple?
Fuji.
Really? Isn't it Fiji?
No.
Are you sure? Wait, isn't Fuji a film? No, Fiji film. Wait, Fuji is an apple. What's Fiji? Fiji is where I had my honeymoon, actually. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, Fuji apples are great. I like Golden Crisp. Yeah, this is still the introduction. We have to get going. So today we'll be talking about the question of equality between man and woman. What are we talking about? What does it mean that men and women are equal? What does it mean biblically? And we'll be talking about feminism and how the movement has taken this idea of equality and taken it to perhaps sinful extremes. We'll be talking about that and more this morning on the Dear Church podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Samuel Yang.
And I am Margaret Sanger.
Please, for once, we will be talking about Margaret Sanger today. And we have with us Pastor Eugene. And today we'll be talking about another hot topic. It feels like that's all that we've been doing these days. But today's topic will be on the principle of equality between man and woman, going specifically into the feminist movement and what we've seen in the past and also in present day. But before we begin, I think, just saying that we're going to be talking about feminism could be a sensitive topic. And I think that may come from a lack of a clear definition, or maybe even an agreement on a definition of feminism, or even what equality is. And so we'll get into that in this episode as well. We also have a similar episode on what is a man, what is a woman, and also on there's an episode on complementarianism, talking about the distinctions between man and woman. So listening to that could be helpful as well. Right?
Yeah, I think, a specific episode on feminism is what I asked Sam to outline so that we could do. It's because of things that are coming out, I suppose, today that perhaps some church folk might be confused about. When, let's say, Hillary Clinton starts her own TV show and songs like WAP are being celebrated as, feministic in nature, or Stacey Abrams came out the other day saying that to say that you have a heartbeat in 6 weeks, it's a manufactured sound by the patriarchy. So things like that. And so if we say, there's a heartbeat in 6 weeks for a baby, that's the patriarchy forbidding a woman to have control over their own bodies. And so how do we respond to that kind of ideology? And why is it under the umbrella of feminism? I think we could get into the history of a little bit of it.
Yeah.
And I think people might enjoy it. So hopefully we'll also have fun doing this.
I think I'll enjoy it. So I wanted to, will you enjoy it? So I wanted to quickly get into maybe just the broad principle of equality, because I think, when we talk about feminism, it's, I guess, how people would view feminism is, equality for men and women, being equal. And equality of men and women is a biblical principle. And so I just wanted to ask and kind of see your thoughts of what that even means. And so in Genesis 1, chapter Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, it reads, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them." And also in response to seeing Eve for the first time, Adam breaks out into song, right? And we've talked about this before, but in chapter 2, verse 23, it reads, "Then the man said, 'This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man.'" And also in First Corinthians chapter 11, verse 11, we read, "Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor man of woman." And this is verse 12. "For as man was made from woman, so man is now born of woman, and all things are from God." So the Bible shows us that men and women are equal. What does this mean? What does it mean that they're equal? And in what respect are they equal? How are they equal? And how does that apply to today?
Yeah, obviously, it does not mean equal physically, biologically. But what we have now done is hopefully we'll get to how this has progressed now into the separation between, I guess, how we may look different physically to now, we can interchange our sexes so we can become we could go from male to female or female to male.
Yeah, yeah.
And that all happened with the confusing of roles that we are to play. So we have conflated roles with, dignity and worth and honor. Because you have separate roles, we're supposed to have, one is better than the other. I mean, even if you look at 1 Corinthians 12, the next chapter, it talks about how that there are different members of the body. And the more, the smaller ones, the modest ones, we actually cover them more. There are more sensitive body parts that we would cover more, things like that. And so 1 Corinthians 12 is even talking about how every member of the body is so important. They're equal as in terms of being part of the body. However, we would treat them differently depending on what role they played. And so I think we are losing a lot of that, or we have lost a lot of that. And now people are just, why can't I?
Yeah.
Something to that effect. Well, why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? Something to that effect. But yeah, equal is we are part of the body of Christ. We are equal in that kind of dignity. We are equal in that aspect worth, and we are equal in the sense where God has made us equal. It's man and woman who become one, and so in that sense we are equal. However, there are still separate roles. Even from Genesis 2, roles are separated.
Yeah.
And so those things are there for our good. It's for the benefit of human society and its flourishing. And the outright rejection of it now, saying patriarchy is. But here's a question for you then. Is patriarchy evil?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
No.
Is it good then?
Yes. It is good.
Patriarchy is what God has designed.
Yeah.
God has designed for men to lead the homes and then society and the world at large. And so when you see that overturned now, because we have said patriarchy is evil, this is the outcome. The outcome is men and women can lead. Either one can lead. And this whole idea, which we in our podcast have called egalitarianism, but for this podcast, we'll call it feminism. Where people have come out and said, well, if you believe that women should get paid equally to men for the same work, then you're a feminist. And so people have come out and said that. I forget who it was. Hermione
Granger.
No, what's the name of the actress? Emma
Watson.
Watson, right. She came out and said, she's a feminist and all the boys and men should be feminists too. And people are continually coming out and saying, if you raise sons, you should raise them up to be feminists. Most recently, I saw a tweet by Andy Ottaway who said, teach your sons to be feminists. And these things are getting traction always. But people, what is feminism? What does it mean to be feminist? I don't think people really define that. And now if we try to define that, you might even see a rolling of the eyes because it's obviously you need to be a feminist.
Yeah.
Obviously, you need to hate the patriarchy because patriarchy is oppressive. But we'll hopefully get into that. But the biblical view is that the traditional patriarchal family is set by God. It's ordered by God. Okay. So that's where we start from, and then we'll see where we start to diverge from that.
In preparation for this podcast, I was reading Eve in Exile by Rebecca Merkel. And one of the questions that comes up is the idea of submission. And I know that this is something that we've discussed before, but perhaps maybe as like a quick review, to maybe in response in conversation to some that may think, well, submission doesn't really feel equal. Submission feels like you're kind of underneath or beneath the head. Could you just give us an example of how to respond to that in conversation to someone that may say something like that?
You want me to talk about the eternal subjugation of the Son?
No, not that one. That's a separate episode, maybe like 5 episodes. But I mean, just kind of, if we're having a conversation with somebody else and they say, if men are equal, if men and women are equal, then why are women supposed to submit? Isn't submitting a lower thing?
Yeah.
How would you respond
Submitting
to that?
is a Jesus thing. And it's obvious if you read, let's say even Philippians 2, who did not consider equality with God,
right,
but lowered himself, right? And so humbled himself. So those are qualities that we get to see in Jesus Christ. If anything, baseline would be if women are given the role of submission, and Jesus Christ came here to submit, then women are given this role that is Christ-like to show the world what Christ is like, or Christ would be, if it was pre-Christ. And the fact that we see submission as completely low, something that is detestable, something that is, if you believe it, then you believe in this, oppressive ideology,
right,
that's going to lower, debase yourself. That's exactly how the devil tempted Jesus, by the way. The devil said, bow to me, worship me, and I will give you half the kingdoms of the world. I will give you half of everything, which basically meant like, I'll give all of this to you if you just bow to me. Take the easy way out. Don't submit to God's will. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And Jesus responded the most strongly in that one, saying, get away from me, Satan, for you shall worship the Lord your God and only him. And so submission is an act of worship to God. It's a way of honoring God. And if we have been given the role to submit, first of all, everybody submits to something, someone, somewhere, okay? It's not like, one person is not going to submit.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line, you'll be submitting to something.
Yeah.
And that's the point that God is trying to make too. So in the home, when we say the wives submit to the husbands, there is a charge given to the wife, but also a charge given to the husband. When you lead, don't exasperate your wife. There are all these things that are given to us. So when you do lead, you're not supposed to lead like, I'm the boss, you follow me, woman, that kind of thing.
Right.
And that would be going directly against, what God has commanded too. And so, yeah, I get it that men can sin, but women, by not submitting, are sinning. And the reason why it's so beautiful is the opposite of sinning is following God's will. So when you're in submission as God has ordered, it's glorifying to God.
And Rebecca Merkel also makes this comparison how Christ submits to God and they're equal. In the same way, women are to submit to their equal, their counterparts, their husband, and in doing so, they glorify God. And I think that's a beautiful picture that we see that's instituted by God in the Bible. So let's talk about feminism. The specifics of how feminism tries to answer the problem that they see of inequality, and if it really lives up to its goal of equality, happiness, and fulfillment for women. Today is the 26th in the year 2022. So I guess the question really is, how do we get here, Pastor Eugene?
How did we get here?
Well, I drove here this morning.
Okay.
But did you see that cover?
No.
Was that a good one?
No, but I saw Brian cut off this small blue car on the road here.
He's very aggressive.
Very aggressive.
Yeah.
He told me, he said, not today. And then he drove around the blue car because he was going too slow. But how do we get to where we are? First, we should mention rebellion against God's order has been there from Genesis 2. Okay, Genesis 3, I should say. Genesis 3. Rebellion against God's order has been there from the beginning. And today it may have a different, let's say, covering, different clothes on, but it's basically the same person.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to show. But we can kind of go through the coverings. So to point them out, this is not a godly covering. But it's in the end, it's the inside that has not changed, to rebel against God's order, for the roles not to be played out the way it should be. And whether it's the abdication of a role or a usurpation of a role, it is still rebellion against God when God said, "This is what I want. This is what I want you to do. This is how you ought to live," and you say, "No, I know a better way."
So I wanted to talk about this concept of waves of feminism. I think most of our listeners have heard, there's first wave, second wave, third wave, and now there's even talks of a fourth wave of feminism in modern day. And so this concept of waves was a way of differentiating the emerging women's movement, is what it is, right?
It's hard to put it into exact dates. So if you put it into exact dates, where some people try to do, it's to show marking out these waves. So let's say first wave feminism, which, I asked you to go over, but basically could have been something like the suffrage movement as part of first wave feminism. So that would have been a marker to mark out first wave. And then there will be a marker for second wave and third wave. But to say it's from like 1888 to 1920 it's not an exact like dates that we are given. It's these markers of events that have transpired, which has either progressed the women's movement agenda or some kind of big event that happened that, you couldn't get away from. Things like the suffrage movement. Or I think we'll go into teetotalism, but prohibition, things like that,
So I want to just start with just the basic foundation. I want to start with proto-feminism. This is Mary Wollstonecraft, whose daughter actually wrote Frankenstein. Did you know? Mary Shelley. Right? But Mary Wollstonecraft wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792. And this challenged the society and the role of women in society at the time. So to my understanding, what Mary Wollstonecraft argued for is the fact that the concept of femininity is social. So it's the norms, the values, the laws, the cultural practices. These are the things that demand women to be a certain way. And so because women, they don't want to be ostracized, they don't want to be considered witches or monsters. Because of that, they now conform and fit into these little norms that society sets.
Okay.
That's the beginning.
Well, I believe Merkel calls or labels it proto-feminism because this is where it is articulated in a way, in a manner that people would have picked up on this idea and ran with it. Again, it's been there. Even in the Roman era, when Jesus lived, there were feminist uprisings, but we wouldn't have called it feminist uprisings, but back then. But there would be women who would go up and wear armor and don spears and stick pigs to show that they could be like men. And so people have done that all the time throughout history. And people have tried to articulate it in a manner that the public could run with. And so this was one of the first ones that we see that people start picking up their ideas.
And then we move on to first wave feminism in America. And this is around the dates of 1848 to 1920, officially starting with Seneca Convention. And of course, I think everybody knows Susan B. Anthony, but also Elizabeth Cady Stanton is another famous leader of this first wave. And this first wave was primarily focused on abolition, teetotalism, and the suffrage movement as well. And it's really interesting that those two are connected. And in her book, there's actually, she writes the lyrics to a temperance song. And this shows you how connected they thought that abolition and suffrage was during that time. And these are the lyrics of that song. But if the men can't drive it out, we'll call for women voters. They'll scrub out the nation's barbershop with all the whiskey bloaters. When we get women voters, goodbye to beer keg toters. Oh ho, when we get women voters. And that is a temperance song booklet. And
this is something that was found, and you know, there were like songs and rhymes and little jingles that they would make up. But Merkel makes a good point where teetotalism, which means the complete absolution from drinking, that means you couldn't drink at all, and the feminist movement and the suffrage movement were all inextricably tied together. For women to get to vote, to get this equality in this movement, what they were trying to show is if you get women voters, we'll get the drinks off the streets. We'll get the bars closed down. We'll get alcohol prohibited. And that's why prohibition actually did occur in the 20s, right? And these men who are now drunks, because of alcohol being out there, will stop being, whiskey bloaters. Will stop being good for nothings. So you put the woman out there and vote. We'll vote those people in that will get alcohol off the streets and things like that, or everywhere. We'll just ban alcohol. And so there is a morality attached to this suffrage movement. And this is pointed out really well, because it's saying, like, you give women the power to vote, we'll make the world a better place. When we'll start out by this big thing, which is to ban alcohol, period. Right? And so, now we know the banning of alcohol does not work. In fact, it's kind of ridiculous that we ever even went through that phase. But this is where they took their moral stance. So the first wave movement that we record now in history of feminism is tied with women voting so that they can get alcohol banned.
Yeah, and so the first wave feminism, they actually got the 15th and the 18th Amendment approved. And so, yeah, it was a wide success for the feminist movement. Also, it's interesting, kind of like you were saying, it may be hard to distinguish the different waves in dates. But I guess between the first and the second wave, we also have Margaret Sanger. And this was a person that wanted to separate the woman from her reproductive responsibility.
Yeah.
She wanted reproductive rights and freedoms for all women. And, it's interesting that the Planned Parenthood that we see today was actually started by Margaret Sanger.
Yeah, she was incredibly racist too. She hated Black people. And so she wanted Planned Parenthood in these Black urban communities so that they would get rid of their babies too. And this is recorded, her saying it, her bringing it out in speeches and things of that nature. And so you could easily look that up too. But she wanted to kill babies. That's what it was.
So I guess it goes back to the question of equality, though, because I think, all these leaders, they wanted women to be equal to men. And so even in Margaret Sanger's case, she said, men can have sex and they don't have to have the repercussion or the consequence of taking care of a baby. Whereas women, they have to, because they have to have the consequence of, taking care of a baby because it's in their womb. And so it's not fair that women and men can just have sex with no consequences. Whereas women, if they do, then they're left with a baby that they have to take care of. And now it restricts them from doing all these other things, like the freedom to have a job, to move up in corporate. All these other things are now limited because women are restricted because of this baby.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up another thinker. His name was Wilhelm Reich. And he was from 1897 to 1957. So he lived a good 60 years or almost 60 years. And he was pretty famous. In fact, during the 1968 student uprising in Paris and Berlin, would the students in their uprising would throw copies of his book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism, at police. So people were trying to first make sense. So all these things are going on. So we don't want to simplistically say feminism happened, blah, Susan B. Anthony, Stanton, and then Sanger. It's true. These are very big names that we know, but there are all these things happening in the world as well at the same time. But there is one common thread that goes through all of them. So I said that he was a famous guy. I'm just going to read a quick quote from his book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism. Remember, people were trying to figure out, why did Nazism come to power or rise, right? And people are trying to figure that out. And so here is one of the quotes from his book. The interlacing of the socio-economic structure with the sexual structure of society and the structural reproduction of society take place in the 4 or 5 years and in the authoritarian family. The church only continues this function later. Thus, the authoritarian state gains an enormous interest in the authoritarian family. It becomes the factory in which the state structure and ideology are molded. So basically what he starts to get at and put down, remember, these ideas have always been there, but now people are putting it down in pen and they are supporting it with other ideas, okay? So you see this feminist movement coming in, and there's this idea that women are equal. Women deserve equal pay. They should be able to vote. They should be able to have individual rights. There are all these things that are coming into place. I'm not saying it's good or bad. What I'm saying is these things are happening. What also comes into place now is this idea. Then, if women need these things, then the patriarchy is bad. Patriarchy is the source of oppression. Wilhelm Reich is able to articulate that in his book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism. The reason why we have fascism, the reason why we have all these bad things is because of the patriarchal family structure. So we need to get rid of the family. In fact, the family is there and it's in place for the first 4 or 5 years, right? That's what he wrote. So until you're 4 or 5, the family takes care. Remember, after the family, 4 or 5 years, they start kindergarten. That's what he's getting at. So once they start kindergarten, the kid is basically given over to the state. And there are problems with that, which we have gone over, probably will in the coming podcasts. But there are problems with that, even that kind of, disordering too. But because of these 4 or 5 years, you got to get rid of it. And then so if you get rid of the authoritarian family, you get rid of them in charge of the kids, that's how you do it. But his main point, and by the way, this is a side note, this is why when Mayor de Blasio was a mayor in New York, he wanted to put pre-K as like free pre-K for everyone, and did it come to pass? Did it not come to pass fully, or something to that effect? We want to bring that age closer and closer to 0. Right when they're born, the state should take over, that kind of thing.
Right.
And so we see that because of the patriarchal family, we have this basic unit of oppression. If there is oppression, then there is no freedom. That's why we have fascism. That's why we have all these, not just fascistic institutions in place, but we have no future. We can't go anywhere because of these oppressive things. So Wilhelm Reich is marrying a lot of these Marxist ideologies, these basic foundational ideologies, into his thinking. And I'll show where this comes to feminism. It's where, and this is not all of his works, but it goes into his next book, which is huge. It's called The Sexual Revolution. And so he starts to point out where conservatives see family as unquestionably good. So you see family, that's an unquestionably good thing. But if you are radical, in his words, if you're radical, then means whatever was unquestionably good, this family unit must be overcome or destroyed. He starts writing that. And so he would, give this example where if a boy wanted to have sex and he was 15 and the girl was like 13, we should not only let that happen, we should encourage it. We should stand by that and support this kind of thing. And so all these things he's saying, he even goes on to say, though, there is a line. What's the line? If the boy wanted to have sex with a 3-year-old, then that is a disorder. It's antisocial or something to that effect. So he would say stuff like that. Now we see that line being blurred because that kind of logic doesn't make sense. If you can have sex at any age, then why does it have to be within their age parameters? That doesn't. So that logic is faulty, and that's why people are now promoting this MAPS.
The minor attracted persons.
Yeah. So what we thought was insane, even by these radicals in the past, we're trying to make normative. It's because this logic doesn't make sense. Just one more interesting side note about Wilhelm Reich. He eventually became obsessed with UFOs toward the later years of his life, and he tried to make like sex machines that would gather like sexual energy, even from like aliens.
Weird.
And tried to sell them. He was in jail in Pennsylvania for like fraud and stuff, but then he died in jail. But the point is, his ideas have not died. His ideas still go, which is what? The patriarchal family is a unit of oppression. So now what we have married together is Marxist ideology with this feminism that's coming out and trying to find its way. So if women can vote, if women should have equal pay, if women should be able to work wherever they're qualified to work in, what's the telos? What's the end goal? And because you don't have that with, as great as you might think some feminists are, and I'm sure we grew up in schools where they teach us like Anthony is a hero, Stanton people don't know as much, but she was the brains behind the whole movement. Anthony was single, that's why she was able to move around and give the speeches. So she was like the voice,
right.
But Stanton was the brains.
Yeah,
and so what you would consider them heroes. I would push back with this. What was the end goal? Total equality? Was that really the end goal? If total equality between men and women, then that needs to be defined, because it's not biblically defined. It's not defined biblically, I should say.
Right.
And so what happens? We have people like Sanger come into place, and we have people like Simone de Beauvoir that we've talked about come into place. She had a book called The Second Sex. And this is where she took this idea that Wollstonecraft that she wrote, de Beauvoir was able to take her ideas, which had no backing, no evidence behind it, not put science. So what de Beauvoir did was she took Freud and she used psychology to back up what Wollstonecraft was initially trying to get at. So this is what she wrote in her book, The Second Sex. One is not born, but rather becomes woman, which is exactly what Wollstonecraft was saying. No biological, psychic, and I'm still quoting from her book, no biological, psychic, or economic destiny defines the figure that the human female takes on in society. It is civilization as a whole that elaborates this intermediary product between male and the eunuch that is called feminine. And so here she starts to marry Rousseau, these Rousseauian ideas that Wollstonecraft was even taking, but also taking on this Freudian concept of psychology where it is your psyche that matters. That's really what makes you form. So identity is formed by social relations, like Rousseau said, and society makes us in that sense. But using Freud, what de Beauvoir was doing is she starts to separate gender and sex. So you could separate the mind from the body. It's almost Gnostic, but it is a separation between gender is psychological and sex is biological. So being a woman, though, it is a gender. It is a psychological phenomenon. And being a woman is that something that you learn in society. Why does she do that? It's what same thing as Sanger. She also takes aim at reproduction being central to a woman's identity and or destiny. So now if you are a feminist, reproduction cannot define who you are. You giving birth should not define you. In fact, that's why we second, third, fourth waves, if I'm to summarize it I think I could summarize it from first wave. It's that women cannot be confined into having babies
Mm.
or being a stay-home mother.
Mm.
Those are low views of women. Those are low values that we place on women. And so that's what they were trying to get at in the 1700s, 1800s, even in the early 1900s. But how did the mid 1900s change that? Technology with birth control. Now we can actually say women can control whether they give birth or not through birth control. And abortion is a form, now in today's world of birth control. That's why fourth wave feminists, this kind of ideology, you cannot go away from birth control and you cannot deny people abortions because it is a form of birth control. It's the exact same thing Stacey Abrams just said a week ago, where if you think that the baby has a fetal heartbeat in 6 weeks, that is the patriarchy telling you that's a heartbeat so that you cannot have your reproductive freedom or your rights. Yeah. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. So like you kind of alluded to, what starts from first wave, goes on to second, third, and fourth, is women should be equal to men in the fact that they shouldn't be able to reproduce. If they can't reproduce, that means, or they can control their reproduction. Yep. They can work as long as men. They can achieve as much as men. They could do all the things that men can do. Yep. So if you say women have to give birth or should give birth, what you're doing is you're degrading or pulling women down from their potential to be like a man. So now we have things like Taylor Swift had a song, If I Were a Man, or something to that effect.
Wait, isn't that Beyonce?
No,
If I Were a Boy?
Taylor Swift had this song. I looked at the lyrics the other day.
Oh, yeah.
What she does in that song, If I Were a Man, she takes all the worst qualities of a man and then she displays it herself because she's a man. So if I were a man, so she dresses up as a man or something in her video and she displays the worst qualities. She says, if I were a man, I'd be the man. And if I'd be the man, I'd be promiscuous, I'd be abusive, I'd be loud, I'd be rude and all these things. Because what she's trying to portray is all men are, I suppose they're like that. Yeah. They're abusive. They're promiscuous. They're just bad people. But the ironic part is at the same time, if she were a man, she's saying she'd be like that too. So she is indicting herself in that sense. She would be exactly like the thing that she is complaining about if she were a man. And so to these modern day feminists, being a man is someone that is just bad. All the qualities of a man are bad and you need to forego them. That's why we have words that came out in like commercials like toxic masculinity. Yep. And that drew ire from the conservative camps and things like that. But people are like eating it up. So you can't be a toxic man or something to that effect. So you must be then, what's the opposite of a toxic man? A feminist. So you should be a feminist. Yeah. And so all this, I'm kind of, I guess, speeding through only to say that now we are in a culture that says housewives are brainless. They are the lesser, right? They are not to be taken seriously. If a housewife wrote a book, then you'd be like, who cares? It's just the housewife.
It's about cooking or
you better have this, PhD, and you better have served or worked in the workforce to a certain degree. Then you have some backing. Then you can stand strong. But raising your children, which is literally, not metaphorically, literally raising the next generation, that is a lesser thing. So if you're a stay-home mom and you raise your kids, you're literally raising the next generation. And that's supposed to be a bad thing. It's supposed to be a lesser thing.
I mean, that's what second wave feminism was about. And I think even in the book, Eve in Exile, that we've been kind of referencing to here and there, she provides this thought exercise where you say, picture a successful woman. What does she look like? And she says, is it somebody that, puts on their suit and goes to their job as a lawyer in a corporate office in New York City? Or is it a mom of 7 driving her kids in a minivan to soccer practice? And almost everybody would say the lawyer. And I think a lot of us in 2022, we have this idea that, and it's kind of ingrained through like songs like you were talking about, music, movies, shows, whatever it might be. A woman that is like a man is successful, whereas a woman that is a mom at home or stay-at-home mom or takes care of her kids is not successful, and they can't wait to go back to work. And that's kind of the narrative that's pitted, I guess, against the Bible, really.
Yeah. So what I find interesting is as the waves come in and as feminism progresses, we see it's not about empowering women anymore. It's about going away from biblical norms. So it's not, we're equal in dignity, but we want you to respect the roles that we've been given. Men should not look at women giving birth, women raising children as a lesser role. This is a role dictated by God so that the world can survive, flourish, thrive, right?
Yeah.
But men doing that perhaps even exacerbated, this response that women have had. Case in point, look at Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton, can you picture her wearing a dress?
No.
Never. She never wears a dress. Why? She wears these power suits.
Yeah.
She always wears pantsuits and things like that. Why? To exude authority, executive power. Because that's the picture of her generation's feminism. You want to be like a man. That's the point. And you are no different from what a man can do. You are a man in that sense. But she still kept her femininity in the sense where women are still women. They should just be treated as men. But then look at the next generation, which is her daughter, Chelsea. And if you ask her, can a man become a woman? Chelsea will say yes. But that's where Hillary Clinton, in that interview, this is only like 2 years ago. Who knows? She may have changed her mind, right?
Yeah.
But this is 2 years ago. Hillary would say, no, a man can. Then Chelsea would say, well, that's where we disagree. Everything else we agree, but that's where we disagree. But that's huge. It's huge because a man becoming a woman, now it's not about women's rights. It's about what? We don't know. That's why Matt Walsh's documentary film, What is a Woman, had an outpouring of, positive reviews because people are like, this is brilliant. All you did was ask a simple question and let people try to answer to expose the absurdity of this movement. And it is tied to feminism. This whole LGBTQ revolution is tied to feminism because feminism is tied to the sexual revolution. So a woman becoming like a man is exactly what has led to this LGBTQ revolution. And so people might not want to do it. People might be like, well, all I wanted was equality for women. Well, what does that mean? Well, we want equal pay for the equal work. Great, we could do that.
Yeah.
But what for? What's the point? Well, for fairness. What is fairness? And so you keep on pressing the idea. Why do you want equal pay? Why do you want to work in the workforce? Why do you want to vote? All these, maybe we're taking these for granted now. We could be like, how dare you ask that question?
Right.
It's like, why would slaves want to be free? Great. Let's ask the question.
Yeah.
Why would slaves want to be free? We should ask the question because I believe today we've lost all of that. We've lost the reason why slaves should be free and why they shouldn't be in lifelong indentured servitude. Why chattel slavery is wrong. I think we would disagree between people who are biblically conservative and those that are not of the Bible camp. I think they would disagree because dignity comes from God. God has ordered things in a way where we ought to bless each other, love each other, lift up the other person to glorify God. And how do we do that? We follow his order. I don't think people will follow that anymore. Even Susan B. Anthony grew up in a Quaker household and she became agnostic. So all these people who are leading these movements are going away from God. They don't know God. They don't want to know God. And actually they're in rebellion against God. And so what is the end goal? So you could have a good thing. And I'm not saying that these things, some of the things that have happened aren't good things. I think some of those things are good and some of those things are inevitable. Some of those things to me are neutral. However, I do believe that the telos, the end, is very, very important. Why would you want certain things? Why do you want this freedom or this right? Why do you want these things? What's the telos? And for a lot of people, the telos is to go away from God. It is the madman that Nietzsche has said, where we have killed God and we need to make our own moral code now. And so, because of that, feminists have now taken up that mantle of trying to push women as far away from the roles that God has given women as possible, fast as possible, because it logically does not make sense. Women will never be men. Basic things are like sports. Women will never be men. In fact, men being women are destroying women's sports, and people are now saying there will be no such thing as women's sports. And now even these leftist, progressive newspapers like the Atlantic, those papers like that, they're saying, yeah, women's sports will not exist in like a couple of years, and that's a good thing. That kind of thing. So, yeah, what feminists thought they were fighting for now has taken this. People might think it's a turn, but is it really a turn is my question. And I think even some, conservative theologians might be surprised that I'm saying something like this, but is it really a turn? Because when you started to grant these rights and all these things, is it a godly thing that you did? Is it a biblical thing that you did? Or is it a cultural thing that you did where people just wanted it? Why? And maybe it was because they didn't want to follow the norms that God has given us. So it's the rebellion thing. So you could have some good things that come out, but in rebellion, in the long term, it'll be bad.
So you're saying that even something as beneficial as women's suffrage.
Well, let's take a hot take on suffrage. Oh, you love these, right?
I don't love them because
let's take a hot take on suffrage. Before that, what would happen is one vote would go to the man.
Yep.
What that meant was basically one vote per household. Okay. The family unit had a vote because the men represented the family unit. And I get it that not all men thought like that, not a woman thought like that, but that would be pretty much how it would be exercised.
Yeah.
The family unit breaking down was, I believe, a lot of the cause for this discontent. Because now we have all these individuals in society who are working, who have jobs, who are living alone, trying to live up their own life to get their own purpose fulfilled, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Because a long time ago, it wasn't like that. Before the Industrial Revolution, it was, well, this is my family. I'm part of 6 other kids, and we got to work the farm. And at night we sleep. Maybe one day I'll get married and start my own farm, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
The family unit moved as a unit. They were the basic unit of society. With the Industrial Revolution, that started to change with paychecks. And then people would get paychecks, and guess what? You could live on your own if you wanted to. Maybe you could even live without a man. Or maybe you could live apart from a man, that kind of thing. Is that always a good thing? With the families being more and more denigrated and separated, is that a good thing? Is it a good thing that we have no-fault divorce? I think the answer to that is no. So is it a good thing that women can get to vote? I think it is inevitable because the family unit has been disintegrated. Women not voting would have been all these individual units, meaning just women living by themselves, would have no say in society because there are so many. Women are getting married later. Men are getting married later too, by the way. Women are getting married later, but because we're talking about women's suffrage. So what are you not going to have any say in the political arena from when you're 18 to 30 for 12 years? Let's say you get married when you're 30. And so for 12 years, you're not going to have any say in society because basic economics is you should be able to vote so that you have a say in what goes on in the economy of the country. And so those are things where we've come to this place where, women have to vote now. But if you say it's a good that is indisputable. And I would say, actually, it's something that had to come to pass because of where we are. Does that make sense? Women voting is something that had to come to pass because of where we are.
And that makes sense because, and again, we're not saying that women are less than. That's not what we're saying. Because I think a lot of times people will take what you just said and think, well, how come, you're saying that it's an inevitable thing, but how come it's not like an essential thing that should have been in the first place because women are equal? People could probably respond like that.
Yeah, I mean, people might think, like, if you just heard this portion without hearing the previous portion of our podcast, people might think like we're from the Stone Ages.
Right. Or just,
right. The women should just stay home and stay silent, right?
Right.
Any kind of healthy family, you would have a robustness of dialogue between the husband and wife, between the father and mother. And they should be in line with how they think, how they decide. Those things should be discussed, right? I think that would be, in a sense, that would be healthier if a husband and wife discussed political issues and came to the decision as a family, let's vote for this candidate, right?
Right.
Instead of, well, you vote for them, I'll vote for them.
Right.
This is my individualistic right.
Right.
If it's a matter of national politics, which affects the family, why is it an individualistic thing? So I give pushback in that sense. And I think people have a problem with it because we cannot get away from the fact that we have broken families. People are getting married way later than they used to now.
Yeah.
And they have the means to live alone, meaning because people, didn't want to get married, whatever, you can now have that option. You can get married when you're 35.
Right.
And then, you can be like, oh, my biological clock is ticking. I better get married quick. Or I need to make more money so I can freeze my eggs just in case. These kinds of technical advances like de Beauvoir and Sanger have now utilized, we can now utilize that kind of ideology, mentality exponentially, like even to a more vast degree. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the technology that we have been afforded now, we can do even way more than Sanger or de Beauvoir could have imagined. So where we could separate the psyche from our physical body. And guess what? People have taken advantage. People have taken that logic to its obvious conclusions, which is LGBTQ. Right? That's why LGBTQ are inseparable now. You got to put them together. When even 20 years ago, people might think like, why would L's and G's hang out? They don't like each other.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, why would T's even hang out with L's and G's? It doesn't make sense. But now they're together, right? And so the logical conclusion is what we have been saying. It's a progression away from biblical norms. It's a progression away from God's ordered values, and it is rebellion against God.
So what if someone responds to that? Because, we've been talking about feminism and we've been saying that, a part of it is they're fighting for equality that is not God ordained in the sense that they are equal in worth and dignity. However, now they're trying to be men. And that's what the feminist movement is somewhat pushing to be like man. What if on the other end of the spectrum, I guess, what if we were to say, well, feminism is actually just a response to just the abuse of power that man has displayed over centuries, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about women's suffrage and how it is, back in that time, it would be a family decision. Well, what if it wasn't a family decision? It was just a husband just kind of strong-arming and saying, hey, this is what we're going to go with no matter what everyone says. And there has been abuses from males. And so how would we respond to that?
Yeah, I think people who think like that have not lived with a mom and dad. Let's say if you live with your mom and dad and it was a healthy family, healthy relationship between the mom and dad. Dads may exasperate the moms from time to time, but that's sin. But they don't constantly do it. Otherwise, you have a very unhealthy household. Does that make sense? And so if the mom wanted something, I think she would have the power to get it. And I think that's very evident in Genesis chapter 3. When the serpent came and he asked the question, who answered?
Eve.
Why did Eve answer? Does the Bible say he addressed Eve? Or did he say he just asked the question? He just asked the question.
Yeah.
And we find out later when Eve takes the fruit, eats it, she gives it to Adam, and it says who was with her.
Yep.
So this whole time, Adam was with Eve. Guess who took that first role of answering? Basically, the lead role.
Mm-hmm.
So even then, there was something off, is my point. And so I think it's always been there, this kind of rebellion. However, to say that women have always been like pushed down by like the physical strength of men is not to know women at all. Women have great strength. Maybe they're physically weaker. For the most part, I believe they are. But it doesn't mean they're weaker in control or what they can manipulate or how they can turn things. They can use that to a great degree and, yes, to a sinful degree as well. And to say that women have had no power until suffrage is to say that all women for thousands of years have been weak and stupid and ineffectual. That's actually degrading all women.
Right.
So to me, that is a very offensive statement to women before 1920. Are you serious?
Right.
So starting from 1920, women are now strong. I think women have been strong since their creation. And it's either you use it to glorify God or you use it for your own ego in rebellion against God. Women can do it, men can do it, but women do it where they usurp the role of man, and men do it when they abdicate the role that's been given to them.
So to someone that would say that feminism is a response to toxic masculinity, you would say that's not entirely the case.
No, I think there have been abuses. There are always abuses. What we have been convinced, though, in mass psychosis, in this mass level of psychosis, is that women structurally have been oppressed for all of time, that kind of thing.
Right.
That's a Marxist ideology. That's Marxism at work. So men are the one who are in the bourgeois class, and then women, in that sense, are the proletariat, right? So we need to have this uprising. That's where I'm saying people like Willem Reich has had a huge influence on this feminist movement because of his thinking. He didn't necessarily want women to have a feminist movement. And when Simone de Beauvoir uses Freud didn't necessarily have a high view of women. In fact, Freud thought women were lesser men. They were like incomplete men, which is what the Greeks thought. Greeks thought that women were like incomplete men. They weren't fully formed. That's why they weren't like a man. And so women were lesser beings. Guess what ideology, guess what teaching didn't teach that and treated them as equals? It's the Bible. If you knew the Bible, you would know that men and women were created equal in the image of God. They were given distinct roles to glorify God and to mutually benefit one another, right? And so that now escapes. Now we're saying nonsense like patriarchy is evil. So now in today's world, where we have now gone on to, I guess, fourth wave feminism, if we say patriarchy, it's automatically understood as an evil. And if you turn back and say, actually, patriarchy might not be so bad, you're a crazy person. What are you, back in the 1930s? That kind of thing. And so patriarchy isn't some kind of made up thing. It's not a creation of humans. Patriarchy is God ordained.
I wanted to just quickly go back to second wave feminism, and one could postulate that Betty Friedan was one of the key figures of this second wave with the book The Feminine Mystique. In the book, she talks about how wives are unhappy because they're stuck at home, in their prison, in their role as mothers and wives. And so it was really a challenge of the traditional gender norms of society at that time. And again, what was glorified and worshiped was working in corporate America, climbing the ranks, becoming the top, becoming a CEO, bringing home the bacon. That was worshiped. And that's what would really give women satisfaction. The reason why women are not fulfilled and not satisfied is because they're at home.
Yeah.
And I think to be honest, like we talked about before, this kind of bleeds into today as well, where when we picture a successful woman, do we picture a mom of 7 or do we picture a businesswoman? What do we picture?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I would see the mom of 8, 7. Like someone that we follow is her name is Rachel Jankovic. Yeah. And she has 8, 4 boys, 4 girls. It's pretty epic. That's amazing.
Yeah.
She still writes books, she goes on talks, she goes on tours, she studies. Um that's a super mom. That's a super woman. But anyway, not everybody can do it all, obviously, but some people can. The whole point is we have been convinced that if you stayed home with your kids, you are unfulfilled.
Yeah.
You are not living up to your destiny. You need to go out, make that bacon just like a man. You need to come home, provide some of that money. We talked about the 2 income trap, where it used to be one person can now work and provide for their entire family of 8 or 10 or whatever it was. But now, even with 2 people working, because there are, with women entering the workforce from the first wave feminist movement, we had this influx of maybe even 100% more workers in effect, right? So if you double the amount of workers, the work didn't increase. What can you do? You can lessen the pay. And now, even with 2 incomes, a household can barely maybe feed like 2 kids in our society, right? That's what people are convinced, at least. I think we could do more. I think you could do like 4. But we're convinced of that. I think one key thing for me is because we've been convinced that without any evidence whatsoever, there's no scientific evidence backing that women were more dissatisfied or unhappy staying at home. There's no evidence for that. But we've been convinced of that through magazines like Cosmopolitan, which we went over, the books that people of former writers for Cosmopolitan did to convince young women actually living this cosmopolitan life is awesome. You get to dress the way you want. You get to buy anything you want, things like that. Instead of being stuck home and thinking about what I can do to buy a new fridge, you can buy your own clothes, that kind of thing. Because they were convinced, are women happier? And the answer, scientifically, statistically, is no. Women are not happier. In fact, there are more women going on antidepressants more and more every year. And the last number I believe I quoted here on the podcast was a few years ago was 42% of white women in the Western world, that is, 45 and older on antidepressants. That's insane. That's an insane number. And I looked up some more recent numbers, but they're as high as like 30% of adult women in the Western world are on antidepressants. That's crazy. Men aren't that much. I think men just kill themselves. Suicide rates are very high, and they're going up now. When we get on these antidepressants in the Western world, are they happier? I think the answer is no. I think we have been convinced that we should be happier. That's why people don't leave the workforce. So they'll stay in the workforce and they believe they should be happier, but they're not. And one interesting part is also women, when they work in a completely egalitarian society, which I believe we have, is that they tend to go into nurture jobs like nursing and teaching, which is what you would do at home. So they're going into nurture jobs and they're making money there because that is, I guess, more bearable than going into like manufacturing jobs, working in the coal mines and things like that, or laying brick, things of that nature.
Right.
You don't see women, storming those areas.
So, I mean, just based on this conversation, it makes me think then, I mean, both of our wives work in the teaching field. So for women that are working, how should they think through this? I mean, we're not saying people should be quitting jobs today, right? Obviously not. But as a Christian woman that understands the importance of their role within the family, as the mother and as the wife, how should they navigate just this decision of working or not working? How does that, what do we do there?
I think it's a very difficult thing to go back like 50, 60, 70, 100 years.
Yeah.
of what has transpired in a day. Maybe it'll take a generation or two if we repent and come back, that people will see that raising children should be a priority in the family. We should not give our children to the state. That's why people are taking kids out of public schools because of COVID. It's interesting, right? Because of COVID, parents were able to see what teachers were teaching their kids because they would overhear on their Zoom calls or whatever what they were teaching. Like, what is it that you're learning?
Right.
What is this? This is not, you're not teaching them traditional English or math. You're teaching them critical race theory. You're teaching them like that my son is a racist just because of his skin color or something to that effect.
Right.
And so parents are taking kids out of public schools in droves, and people are realizing, guess what? Kids have been given to the parents for a reason, so that that's something, that's an authority that God has given parents to raise their children. So I think that's the number one thing. So I get that pragmatically it might be difficult to change a lot of things that we're doing. So it's like, Peach, what are you really saying here, right?
Yeah.
You want me to quit my job? Not if you're going to starve, not if you can't survive.
Right.
But let's say you can. And you can work on the side and it's gravy. You could work like, 4 or 5 hours a day, maybe. I don't know, whatever the case is. And then you go home and you could primarily raise your kid. I would say raise your kid. Raising your kid is way more important than you making 100 or 200K.
Yeah.
That's not that important, honestly. If your kid goes down the tubes or down the drain and you're making 200K, what's that worth to you? It's worth nothing, honestly. And I believe women have been given special gifts to do that. I mean, I have a 4-month-old now, almost 4-month-old now. And there are things that I recognize that I share with my wife. Hey, only you can do this because of who you are in nurturing this child. Only she could do these certain aspects. I wish I could do them, but I can't.
Yeah.
I wish I could stay with the kid 24/7. But I can't. Only the woman can. I get it with technology. Now we have like formula, blah, 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 and all this stuff. But there is a spiritual element to motherhood and nurturing that I believe that has been gifted by God. That physical points to the spiritual. And I wish people would get it. People separating the spiritual and physical are taking the exact same route that Simone de Beauvoir has been taking, where they separate the psyche from the body. It's like, yeah, we could separate that. Breastfeeding has nothing to do with my spiritual life. I think it does. And I think the more we focus and meditate on the Word of God, the more we'll see what an important role the mother has in the raising of their children. And so hopefully, if we get the principle, then our lives will start to match what the principle is.
I'm going to combine third and fourth wave. Actually, some people say that the fourth wave is a continuation of the third wave. And third wave feminism was primarily during the 90s, focusing on sexual harassment in the workplace, shortage of women in positions of power. And even present day, which is, some people might say is the fourth wave or the continuation of the third wave, with the Me Too movement, with the internet and the Me Too movement and holding powerful men accountable for their actions. And even, like you said before, paying attention to systems that allow this type of misconduct to occur. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think, since you mentioned that, I think the third and fourth waves are where this notion of intersectionality really started to explode. So you need diversity in the workplace. We need more women up in the CEO positions. Why? It's not because of merit anymore. It's just because of the fact that they are a woman.
Right.
Just because you're a woman, you have something to bring to the table. Just for the fact that you have biological parts of woman, you should fill up certain seats, right? So it has gone away from this meritocratic way of doing things to now this other way, which is intersectionality. So meritocracy and intersectionality are completely opposing each other. We see this now in sports, where sports is a complete meritocracy. Okay, you can't do sports because this person is Asian. His baskets should count 5 points.
Yeah.
And if someone's black, his baskets should count 1.
Right.
That's racist, right? Yeah. But because it's a meritocracy, sports, where you have skills, achievement, all these things have to take place. The workplace should be a meritocracy. However, we've taken that out, and now we want to inject other things, because we want other groups to catch up. What's wrong with giving them a little help? Things of that nature. And people, what is wrong with giving some people that have been abused and have been oppressed for millennia a little help, right? And so because of that, we're seeing it go into a place where it's not just women that need to fill up the diversity quota. We need all sorts of intersectional levels of people. Mm-hmm. So now people are like, wait a minute. The last thing I want to be is quote unquote cisgender, right? I want to be something. So now we have all these young people identifying as LGBTQ. According to the most recent Gallup polls, it's like 20%.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden they all turn gay and queer, that's not true. We keep on saying the new meritocracy is not meritocracy at all. The new meritocracy is your intersectionality. That's what gives you your worth. That's your skill level.
Yep.
That's a really easy way to do it. Then all you have to do is claim to be some other gender, and then you'll get some extra oomph on your resume, right?
I always found it interesting that the current press secretary for the White House, they always talk about the fact that she is the first Black, non-straight female. I just find that so interesting. They always talk about that fact. They don't talk about her qualifications. They just talk about that.
Who cares what the press secretary is? As the press secretary is a mouthpiece for the president.
Yeah.
Who cares what race you are? You have to be a good mouthpiece.
Right.
So, and we could say a lot about KJP, but that's an interesting thing because I believe she has no merit on her own. That's why they have to, keep on espousing these things. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so now your intersectionality is your merit. That's your resume. That's what trumps everything else. So it's not your speaking skills. And if we're talking about KJP, she has no speaking skills. She's not articulate. She's actually pretty terrible at her job. And she constantly revises what President Biden has said. Maybe it's for a reason. Like most recently, President Biden a week or two ago said that COVID is over.
Yes.
And then Karine Jean-Pierre came out and said, actually, the president has been consistent that we still need these COVID policies in place and blah, blah, blah. Well, no, you're directly contradicting the president. If COVID is over, we don't need these emergency measures in place. But, I don't know. I don't know if she's just really bad at her job or someone else is controlling her or both. But she doesn't make any sense when she's talking. It's really hard for me to understand exactly what she says because it's just a word salad, very similar to the vice president. It's just word jumbles. And that's what you have to do when you're talking nonsense. You can't talk logically. You can't talk straight. You got to talk in a million words and say nothing. And so that's, I guess that's a skill to these people.
You were talking about intersectionality. I think now today, with the third and fourth wave as well, but today, I guess the more intersections you have, the more believable you are. And I think that was an issue with the Me Too movement, where so many people would come out with these different situations of being harassed or assaulted. And some of them were true and is really tragic. And there needs to be, the right consequences, the repercussions for the males that have committed these heinous crimes. But there are also times where they weren't true. Some of these hashtag Me Too movement, I guess, quotes or stories were actually fake. And so with this intersectionality comes this idea that the more intersections that you have, the more believable you must be. And now if you refute and say that's not true, then you are just one of the oppressors.
Yeah, I think most recent cases that we could look at are things like Kim Kardashian.
What about Kim Kardashian?
Kim Kardashian brought up in a recent interview about how she was, taken advantage of when her sex videos were released. Yeah, those videos are the videos that made her famous. Like no one knew about who she was because we live in a porn-filled society. She became huge after those videos were released. And then in her new talk show, whatever, she brought it up, how she was hurt by all the things. And then Ray J, who was her partner at the time, came out and finally said, this was all a lie. It's always been a lie. I had to sign this thing. And it's been a huge thing. He put it on his Insta. It's because he came out now because he's saying, I have a daughter now, and I don't want her to think that I'm this kind of person when I'm not.
Oh, yeah.
So apparently, I guess this is like Hollywood gossip.
The tabloids.
Welcome to the tabloids of Dear Church podcast. But yeah, what is now being alleged by Ray J is that Kim Kardashian's mom reviewed those tapes before they were quote unquote released or leaked, I should say. So Kim Kardashian's mom looked at these porn tapes that Kim Kardashian did with Ray J to leak, quote unquote, leak one to the public so that Kim, her daughter, could get famous. It's sick on multiple levels. It's sick on multiple levels, so many levels, but sick on multiple levels. If that's true, and then Ray J is claiming it's true because he's claiming he has evidence of where he has one signed document of Kim, of one of those non-release forms or whatever it is that he was able to sign, and Kim would actually sign it and didn't. You could follow it. I don't want this to be too much about that, but if that's the case, like we automatically believe Kim. There was no test. You can't test that. If someone says that they've been abused, that they've been taken advantage of, then absolutely, we should weep with them. Another one was Olivia Wilde. These are the most recent ones. These are all within the last 2 weeks or something. Olivia Wilde came out and said like, what's his name? Shia LaBeouf. Shia LaBeouf, yeah.
LaBeouf.
Yeah, Olivia Wilde was making a film with Shia LaBeouf, and then, she threw him under the bus. And because, she's a feminist and, he didn't get along with this one female actress or whatever it was. It turns out all a lie. Shia LaBeouf came out and, would just say very graciously, this is not true. I can't even let you get away with this because I have a family and I don't want them to believe this. So now men are actually sticking up for what they believe because they have a family.
Yeah.
They have kids. They can't be thrown under the bus like that for this feminist movement. They're all fake. Remember Kavanaugh's hearings, Brett Kavanaugh's hearings? Who was that woman?
Was I old enough for those?
Dude, it was a few years ago.
So I was 31.
So in the Kavanaugh hearings, to get him confirmed, there was a woman that came out who accused him of rape when they were younger. And her name was Christine Blasey Ford. She had no evidence. She had no witnesses to back her up. She had nothing except her word. People took it because we need to believe her because of the Me Too movement. It happened so many years ago. People are like, are you sure this happened? And are you sure it's Brett Kavanaugh? She's like, I'm certain it was him, that kind of thing, and came out. All the things that she said in those hearings, it didn't match up. It couldn't have been him if you look at where he lived and who the people he hung out with and all those things. And people just believed her. Guess what? Now no one talks about Christine Blasey Ford because it's not true. There's no evidence to back that up. But people will still not like Brett Kavanaugh. You can't bring Blasey Ford up, but you could just say Kavanaugh is this, is this rat. He's this terrible person. There's no evidence to say he was a terrible person. I don't know if he's a terrible person or not, but Blasey Ford's testimony didn't have any evidence to back it up for him to be a terrible person, right? And so these things are quite fascinating that we're in this place And then the reasoning that leftists will use is, well, it's because we've been oppressed this long. Yeah, let's win some. When O.J. Simpson got off on that trial, he was innocent, right?
Mm.
And he was jailed for something else later, but he was innocent apparently of his wife's murder. Like, people would joke, like these black comedians would joke, it's like, yeah, we know he did it, but you look at all these white people that got off on murder because they're white. It's good that one of ours gets off now. So you're promoting injustice in the name of justice. You know, that's what it is. So that's why it's illogical. This whole intersectional movement is illogical because that's what it is.
Mm.
You want justice with injustice.
Yeah.
You know, in the name of justice, we will create as much injustice as possible as long as we get justice in the end. That doesn't make any sense at all.
So now that we've talked about these different elements of, I guess, the broad feminist movement, as a Christian, how should we generally view feminism? Is there such a thing as a Christian feminist? I mean, how can we support the equality of men and women, and at the same time stay away from the non-biblical aspects of feminism?
So I don't think we should placate into the definitions and the words and the slogans of the world today. Even things like going to the women's marches, I don't think is a good thing. The fact that they didn't allow any pro-life women's groups in should have just been a heads up to any Christian who wanted to walk in a women's march.
Mm-hmm.
Women's march, even if they did, doesn't make any sense. What are you marching for?
Right.
So it's like we're marching for equality, equal pay. Obviously, that was debunked. Obama's usage of women get paid 70 cents on the dollar for men. That's not true. No statistics show this.
Mm.
And so those are all lies that are continually repeated, but it's because it's catchy. They'll continue to repeat that lie. Women get paid 70 cents on the dollar for men. That's a lie. It's just blatantly untrue, but people keep on repeating that because it's easy to remember. And you keep on getting people angry, guess what? They'll vote for you, that kind of thing. So these are terrible people who are doing that. I wouldn't placate to any of that. I would suggest then what we should do is promote femininity, biblical femininity. What is that? And read the Bible. I mean, classically, our women's ministry, the first thing that they did was go over Proverbs 31, the ideal woman. And then they would go over that. And then they would go over other women heroes of the Bible, like Ruth or Naomi or Esther. And so I would go with biblical femininity. I would not go with feminism. I would never say that you're a feminist because by definition, feminism is not Christian. To separate yourself from the man, to separate yourself from the family unit is not God's order, right? Men and women belong together. They need to get married. Then they need to, play those roles that God has given them.
I realize we never defined feminism. So, according to Oxford Languages, feminism is the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of the equality of the sexes.
Yes. It's a philosophy that advocates for equal rights for women and men, socially, politically, economically, and all these other ways, okay?
So it's interesting that this is something that we would agree with in the sense of we believe that women are equal to men. But the way that the how and the why of how the feminist movement takes it is non-Christian.
So equal treatment is where we would, not agree with. What does equal treatment mean? So feminists will now say equal treatment means we need 50-50, like women and men.
Right.
That's not equal treatment. That's not fairness. And so we wouldn't agree with any of feminist philosophies today. So I wouldn't call myself a feminist.
Wait, when you say that we don't believe in 50-50, could you just explain what that means?
The diversity quota, excuse me.
Gotcha. So you're saying like, let's just say in a school, it has to be 50% male, 50% female, rather than actually taking into account the merit or, how smart they are. You would just fill the quota.
Yeah.
Gotcha. You know, I did have a question about equal pay because I think it's such a big thing. Um, people say, oh, we have to support equal pay. But if it's not true, if men and women are paid equal, I guess outside of sports, right? I mean, I think it's common sense that NBA players would get paid more than WNBA players just because of the revenue they bring in. I think it's common sense that the women's national soccer team for the US would get paid less than the men's national soccer team because they bring in less money.
Well, they won
They won 2 World
their
Cups,
suit.
but still,
No, they won their suit.
right. So how does that work? I'm just kind of confused about that.
Yeah. So it's not about merit. It's about equality. Is you just get the same thing. It's very Marxist. It's like no matter what, you should get paid the same. And if men's soccer teams get paid, millions and millions of dollars, so should women's soccer teams. It's foregoing all the reasons why men's soccer teams get paid millions and millions of dollars.
Right.
Because they bring in millions and millions of dollars of
Right.
revenue. They bring in billions and billions of dollars of revenue. And so women's soccer teams don't even bring a fraction of that. But yeah, they want it. You have to forego all that and say this is equality. This is what we disagree with. And this is why when people like fight against meritocracy, I'm very confused. And by what standard are you going to award people and prize people?
Right.
You're not. You're going to go on some weirdo intersectionality kind of, tirade.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think we've covered a lot of material, but I still think that our listeners may still have questions. And so if you have any questions on anything that we talked about today, or any pushback on anything that we talked about today, we'd love to hear from you. So please email us at podcast@cgsnj.org. That would be amazing to have that kind of interaction and be able to talk through the questions and the pushback.
Yeah. So I guess we could end with, what do women have that makes them equal? They have the dignity. They have the worth that God has designed for them, just as God has given men that dignity and honor. And a believing woman should also seek to obey God, walk in peace and grace, remembering they have equal access to all the spiritual blessings in Christ. But saying all that, there are roles that women have been given that will empower you, that will satisfy you, because that's what God has ordained for you. So these are God-given roles. And when you go away from them, it will dismantle the family. It will dismantle society. That's what we're seeing. So women fulfilling their roles are good for everybody, not just women. So hopefully we'll see that even though there's equality in the world, what we want to promote is God-given mandates. They're good, and they will bring ultimately the equality that you seek.
So only when men and women live according to the design of the Creator would they be satisfied, fulfilled, happy, and glorify God, right?
Yeah.
Did I end that right?
I think it's great.
Thank you so much. And we thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we talk about Christian nationalism. What is it? I'd love to find out. Tune in next week to find out. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith.
Peace.